over to you.
So, good morning, everyone, for our second Sustainability Energizer. Just a bit of background for those of you that have not attended before. I just want to spend a sort of couple of minutes on a quick catch up. So, where we are is the UK government introduced legislation in 2019 making it mandatory for large companies like us to report annually on our energy and carbon emissions, as well as our energy efficiency measures. Part of that reporting is a mandatory requirement. It means we have to report it in our financial accounts and statements. And our financial accounts and statements are publicly available documents so they can be seen by our customers and other business partners. For those of you who attended the presentation on the history of the Royal Warrants, well, 2 or 3 weeks ago now, you may recall the importance of sustainability and the responsibility placed on services and trades to the royal household for maintaining the highest standard and integrity in the pursuit of becoming ever more sustainable businesses. In fact, there was a slide during the presentation where the Planet Mark logo was displayed as a partner and independent certifier of the Royal Warrant Holders Association's own carbon emissions. In addition, the Royal Warrant Holders to the Royal Warrant Holders Association, Planet Mark also certify carbon emissions for other business who we know, for example, the Bumblebee Conservation Trust, Fortnum& Mason, Partridges London, Forager, CH&Co, now Parda Compass, and Volvo. Since last year, Corney Barrow has partnered with Planet Mark, who have provided us with independent certification of our mandatory and energy and carbon emissions for Scope 1 and Scope 2. And this year, we've taken on the task of looking at our additional carbon emissions, which are not mandatory for our company to report on. So why have we reported on them? For the business to fully understand its impact on the climate, it was imperative that we measure the carbon emissions through our UK business. This means we looked at the carbon emissions of everybody coming to work, of business travel, of getting wine delivered to Hoddesdon and East Kilbride, as well as that wine being delivered on to our customers. This year, we've calculated a baseline of Scope 1, 2, and 3 carbon emissions, giving us an idea of our total carbon emissions. And with this information, we can now plan to reduce those emissions and set a target for when our business will reach net zero, which Hannah will talk about later. Before I'd like to finish, I'd like to personally thank a few people who have helped collect the enormous amount of data that have enabled Planet Mark to calculate our baseline. And those people are Christina, Ben, Steph, Ray, and Colette for collecting Scope 1 and Scope 2 data in relation to the specific C&B sites, which includes data on paper and waste, as well as manually sorting through our business travel data. To Daniel for the work on and the continuing work in progress on the expenses app. For Mark collecting the data from Great Bear on goods, weights, and miles to delivery. Mark, with Daniel's help, pulling together data for our shipments to the UK from our producers. Anna, Tree, and Ray helping drive the direction and ideas for our Green Team newsletter. And lastly, everyone, pretty much 107 people who completed the commuting questionnaire. Thank you. This is a team effort, and some of you still have your roles to play. So with that, I shall hand over to Hannah.
Oh, that was a lovely intro, Sedona. Thank you so much. That's wonderful. And welcome to, there's been a few people who've joined us from the waiting room just a little late, but all good. It's great to have you here. So yes, thank you so much. My name is Hannah. I'm here to deliver your next annual sustainability the Energizer session. I was actually with you guys back in May 2023. So this is not the first time we have sat down together. And it's just my pleasure to be with you again, right? I appreciate that a lot has happened, right, since the last time we were able to sit down together. And the reality is that in the world of sustainability, we can never really stand still, right? We always need to continue to push the envelope. And that is a job that's not on any one person's shoulders, right? We all have a role to play. So I'm so pleased to be with you again to check in and to help you maintain momentum on your sustainability and net zero journeys, right? So here's a look at what we're going to cover today. The session isn't wildly different from the last time we sat down together. It has a very similar format, but the reality is, you know, again, a lot has changed. We want to share new information with you and we want to talk about some new ideas as well, right? So we're going to do some scene setting. I always just find that, you know, the way our mornings go, we've likely looked looked at our emails already, responded to some Teams chats here and there, and I just want to make sure we're in the right frame of mind for this conversation. So we will start with a little scene setting. We'll then go to updates on your organization's carbon footprint. As Sedona mentioned, you guys have gone really above and beyond, and you are now measuring your full Scope 3 carbon footprint, which is incredible, and I'm really excited to share the results of that with you. And then equally, we're going to get together and we are going to brainstorm some ideas. I see that I've misspelled together, and that's because my coffee hadn't sunk in today when I changed that last bullet point. So thanks for your forgiveness with that. All right, let's dive straight in. The only last thing I have for you is a little bit of housekeeping. You would have seen that this is a recorded session. We know that there's going to be a few people who aren't able to attend, and so it's helpful for us to record this session for them. We will circulate the slides. Again, we always find that the slides in and of themselves can be quite a helpful resource, so we'll make sure you get a copy of those following the session. Cameras on if you're welcome, if you're comfortable. My team seems to be like being a little bit funny today, and your cameras are kind of flickering on and off. So I appreciate that a lot of you have your cameras on, so I might not be able to see you. What I would suggest is, feel free to interrupt me if you have questions, or use the chat as another really good tool. If you, for some reason you're like raising your physical hand and I can't see you, it might be an issue with my team's cameras here. Otherwise, you'll notice that I've put you guys on mute where possible. We've all been in those Teams calls where too many people are talking and there's echoes, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll have an opportunity to come off mute at certain times, but for the time being, we can stay on mute, right? All right, lovely. The last thing I wanted to mention is that we are going to use a tool called Slido. Hopefully you will have remembered this from the last time we were together. Indeed, it is one of our favorite tools here at Planet Mark. And this is a way for us to kind of get everyone feeding in. I appreciate, Pippa, you're there with a room full of people, and we know that, Adam, you have the Newcastle site with you as well. So this is essentially a way for us to hear from all of you throughout the session, right? So let's actually, with that in mind, let's give Slido a test. So in order to join Slido, I think for those of you who are in a room, probably using your phones is the easiest way to do this. Simply scanning the QR code with your phone. So everybody in the rooms can go ahead and open their camera. I'm going to do this alongside you just to quadruple check that everything is working, even though I sense checked it this morning. For those of you who are logging in from individual PCs, you can also just go to slido.com and it will say, the first thing that'll kind of come up is join as a participant, enter the code here. And the code is 3458, really straightforward, right? So don't worry, these instructions are going to be on the next slide as well, but I'm conscious that when you log in, it says there's no active polls. So let's bring up a poll so that everybody can answer, right? The question I have for you today is, have you attended a Planet Mark Sustainability Energizer workshop in the past? As I mentioned, we were with you guys back in May of 2023. We had both an in-person session and a virtual session like we did this year. So I'm just sense checking what the latest is. Oh, this is fabulous. So I love this tool. What I can see on my side is that 24 of you have responded. There we go, 25. That's excellent. This is just a nice, easy question to get us all comfortable with Slido, right? And don't worry, the joining instructions show up every time we have a poll on the screen, but the reality is that once you've joined, you should get right in the next time we have one of these polls, right? So excellent. Let me just reflect on your answers here. So a lot of you have been in the sessions in the past, which is wonderful to hear. I'm excited to kind of mix things up for you and elevate the conversation. But equally, there's a few of you who this is your first opportunity to sit down with us, right? And that's very familiar. We know that we have, staff turnover and things like that. Either that or we were busy on the day and maybe just didn't catch it. So it's wonderful to have a few fresh eyes in the session as well, right? So this is just a little snapshot. I just wanted to bring this photo because it's nice to, reflect on memories here. And this was a look at when we were all together back in May 2023. I appreciate this was the in-person session, but it's just lovely to kind of reflect on the fact that we have been able to sit down with so many of your teams, at multiple opportunities and really get to grips with all things sustainability, right? So that's fabulous. Let me just kind of move us right along into section 1 here. We're going to do a brief intro to Planet Mark. Again, conscious that quite a few of you said you haven't been in one of these sessions. I just want to make sure you know who Planet Mark are, right? So at Planet Mark, our purpose is empowering organizations to solve the climate crisis. So at our core, we are a sustainability certification, and we help organizations measure their impact, and we also hold them accountable for making improvements year on year, right? That's how organizations maintain their Planet Mark certification. Now, that measurement side of things is really important. It's a critical first step for any organization, but the reality is that, you know, carbon footprinting only gets us so far. The measure piece will really only take us to, a certain level. And we need to ensure that we get, individuals involved in order to make the change on the ground, right? That positive change that happens. So we at Planet Mark have an engagement team. That's what the team that I'm a part of, essentially, that helps step in, helps educate, inform, and inspire your teams to go away and make that positive change on the ground and help you build that organic culture of sustainability from within. The other element, the work that we do at Planet Mark, is we have sort of a communication arm as well. We feel very strongly that it's not enough to be making change in, pockets of isolation. We need to share our challenges and successes with the wider world in order to create this, again, vast societal transformational change. So we have a whole team here that's dedicated to helping you talk about the work that you're doing in a sort of confident, transparent way. So we've been going for about 11 years now. I think I can officially say 11 years. And this is a look at some of the collective impact that we have had across our 800 plus members, right? So it's been incredible. Corney and Barrow are absolutely a part of these numbers, which is wonderful to reflect on. Collectively, I love that top stat. We have reduced over 700,000 tons of CO2 from the atmosphere, right? That's enough energy to power over 80,000 homes for a year. We've engaged, me, an engagement manager. I love focusing on how many individuals we've been able to reach. It's over 15,000, which is wonderful. So thank you so much for being a part of this incredible community that are making really tangible, positive change. We are working with Corney and Barrow in a bit more of a elevated way, I would say. A lot of our members are doing something that's called business certification. It's getting to grips with their scope 1, 2, and a few scope 3 categories. But the reality is that Corney and Barrow have really taken this to the next level. They're on a full net zero program with us. So in addition to, hold on, I can get my laser pointer. I'm conscious there's a lot of words on this slide. We have our annual business certification here. We have also done a scope 3 measurement with you guys. We've done things like not just the annual Energizer, which we're doing today, which is something that's available to all of our members, but we've elevated this with things like net zero masterclasses, right? We also have a net zero target setting session to book in with you guys in the very near future. And we are essentially going to be working with you to create a very comprehensive net zero strategy and action plan, right? So keep an eye out for that good work, but equally, I want to just keep us focused on where we've gotten to today. So let's transition now to just setting the scene for us to ensure we're in the right frame of mind. The last time we were together, we talked about the big picture, right? So for the 65% of you who were like, yes, we were here in the last session, this photo might feel familiar, right? But we're going to actually transition and do a little slightly different scene setting today. Rather than the big picture, sort of zooming out, we're going to zoom in, right? And we're going to focus on the small picture. So here we have some seeds. These are actually apple seeds, tiny, lovely little plant embryos full of potential. And if they're lucky, with the odds against them and fierce competition, one day these seeds will sprout, right? And with the time and appropriate resources, this seed might eventually become a tree that indeed might bear fruit and nurture others, creatures like, birds and squirrels, and of course, notably, humans, right? Humans that perhaps more than any other creature on Earth really know how to harness the power of nature, right? Humans that are maybe at times a little too good at using nature to their own gain, right? So it's nice, I find, just to take some time out of our busy day to reflect on our deep connection with nature. Oh, bless you. Bless you. No worries. You on mute so we don't have that happen again. It's all good. That was actually, it made me smile ear to ear. So yes, we just want to take some time to reflect, right, on our deep intrinsic dependence on even the smallest of things, yeah? Because after all, that is why, it's at the core of why we're here today. By being Planet Mark members, Corney and Barrow have acknowledged that our once peaceful relationship with the natural world is being threatened, right? And they are taking responsibility for their contribution to the climate imbalance. Indeed, we are on a path to meaningful action. You guys are now, a few years in to Planet Mark membership, and you have already brought about some really profound change. And what lies ahead is more of that good stuff, right? So we want to chat with you now about the world of net zero, this path that we are on, and what we're aiming to achieve. And just be super clear on what net zero is as we begin to talk through some more terminology throughout the session, right? So ultimately, net zero is about radical emissions reduction. So we can see here on this slide, this is something I would have brought probably to the session last time, but we can see here we have a timeline. 2050, as Sedona indicated, is our sort of mandatory sort of net zero target. This is essentially what the UK government put in place in 2019. And we have to make, to be super clear, a 90% reduction, minimum 90% reduction by that time. The net in net zero refers to that last remaining 10%. The reality is that there are likely going to be some areas, some technologies that just haven't caught up to our ambition in this space, and some things are going to take a little bit longer to kind of fully decarbonize. Aviation is a great example of something we expect is going to take potentially a little longer than 2050 to fully decarbonize. So the reality is that we do have a sort of maximum of 10% of our footprint we can offset using carbon removal offsets, right? So offsetting will be a piece of this puzzle, but the reality is that the main focus of net zero is on the reduction in the first place, right? Now, if we just kind of scroll backwards here, the other axis we have relates to an organization's carbon footprint, their impact, and getting to grips here with what 100% of our net zero baseline is a really big and challenging step, right? A lot of organizations are genuinely still here, still trying to do this, right? Doesn't mean that they're not implementing sort of various initiatives to help them reduce, but especially this scope 3 piece is really difficult to get under the skin of. So the fact that Corney Barrow have gone through this process, have started tackling this head on, really puts you ahead of the curve. So that is incredible to see. And I promise if you don't know what these scopes are, I am going to elaborate on them in future. The only other element to the net zero sort of picture here, the path that we're seeing, is this middle ground. This is an example of a near-term target. This is not something that is like legally required the same way that sort of achieving net zero by 2050 is, but we know that it can be really difficult if we just sort of wake up to this reality in 2040 and try and make 90% reduction in 10 years. So these near-term targets are designed to help get us on the right trajectory, right? They're also there to ensure that we make radical emissions reduction in the next decade, which is going to be critical to avoiding, catastrophic tipping points. So we do need to ensure that we are making sort of emissions reduction as soon as possible. Yeah. So we know as well, that this is something that is very motivating for businesses for a variety of reasons. I usually bring this slide to help us talk through the moral imperative. We recognize that our communities, our environments are experiencing things like floods and droughts and heat waves and tropical storms. And we know that there is definitely a real moral imperative to be paying attention to this, really for, the sake of humanity. We have also touched on already the legal imperative, the fact that the 2019 amendment to the UK's Climate Change Act means that every UK business, whether they know it or not, must reduce their total greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by the end of 2050. And we also know that there's a lot of really holistic commercial reasons to do this as well. Since the last time I spoke with you, we have actually undertaken what was referred to as the UK Net Zero Business Census. And this essentially was designed to help get a really robust data set from really as many businesses across the UK as we could about what net zero measures are being implemented and, just trying to essentially benchmark for the UK's industry progress, right? So how we did this, we essentially collaborated with a whole bunch of major business associations, large corporates, and media outlets, all who helped us circulate a single survey that then was able to kind of collect this enormous national data set. We got responses from over 2,000 organizations, and it was really incredible to see some of the findings. So I would encourage you, I'll link it in the follow-up, to go through this report in more detail. It is fascinating, but the one slide that I have for us today just kind of talks about at what are these benefits that organizations see as far as, pursuing net zero is concerned. What are those benefits? So we have said things like contributing to tackling climate change. That's really exciting to see. That's that moral imperative emerging. And it's amazing to see that I think it's 88% of organizations said there was minor to significant benefit for that reason. But we have other things on the slide here, like demonstrating industry leadership, regulatory compliance, which we've touched on, competitive advantage. That's a really good one. Long-term resilience to market changes. I was talking about this with an organization just yesterday about, I think it's one of those lessons we learned, particularly from the pandemic, around supply chain disruption and things like that. So that's definitely something we want to pay attention to. New customer business and development opportunities. We know that organizations that are applying for tenders, the weighting as far as ESG and net zero is concerned is becoming increasingly high. Customer retention, similar things. Cost savings. That's an example that has been around for ages. I feel like every organization is trying to pay attention to their bottom line, and where they can, reduce their electricity consumption and have a lower electricity bill, that's just good for business as well as being good for the environment, right? But let's just sense check with you guys now. I did ask this question in a similar way last time, but I find that this can change depending on what is happening within our organization at that time. So I'd love to use Slido now to just sort of sense check, what do you see as the benefits for Corney and Barrow pursuing net zero at this time? So again, you can open up Slido. If I look, yeah, I didn't actually have to log in again. It just sort of pops up and you can type in a word or two. Good, got a few people typing. Nice. These are amazing. Here we go. Answers flooding in. These are so good. Oh, and they're so broad, right? I love this. The reality is that we're never going to see everyone in one of these sessions put the same answer in, right? And that's because we all have different perspectives. We all are coming at this from sort of different corners of the business, different departments, and we might have different sort of reflections. This is amazing. So we have a lot of people saying remaining competitive or just long-term resilience. I liked that one. Reputation, positive PR, all of those things are definitely embedded as well. Yep, reputation. I would agree. I mean, you guys have an incredible reputation and it's part of maintaining that, right? Customer retention, contributing to the health of our planet. Yes. Getting interest from our customers who are committed to this. Yes. The reality is you're probably working with quite a lot of organizations and individuals who are committed to this. Oh, this is so great. Doing the right thing. I hear that a lot. That's a wonderful reflection. Customer retention, new customer business. Yes. Lower costs. I'm so glad somebody brought that up. Of course, we really want to be very sensitive to that, right? So this is lovely. Again, there's no right answer. We find that the answers to this question are also usually quite diverse, and that is indeed, all of these are correct, right? So thank you so much for responding to that. I'm going to move us along. Oh, helping to protect our natural world. That's so lovely. I'm going to leave it on that one. That's a great one. So let's transition now to talking about your carbon footprint, Corney and Barrow's impacts in this space, because this is going to allow us to be increasingly tailored about how we can approach solutions, right? So what I have for you is actually from the last time we were here. So those of you who said, yes, we attended the last Energizer, this is the information that I shared with you at that time, right? This is a look at your carbon footprint from way back. The reporting period there was May 2021 to April 2022. So this is, again, reflective of, not necessarily how your business is now, but how it was during that specific 12-month period. And you can see here, your footprint was quite small at that point in time. This is our first year measuring, very familiar for us to just be trying to get to grips with a few key categories, our emissions from our buildings, like our electricity, our natural gas, business travel, fleet travel, and it was not even 250 tons of TCO2e, right? But the reality is that we have been able to go a bit further by now, skipping ahead quite a few years. And this is a look at what Corney and Barrow have been able to measure to date, right? Let me talk you through the scopes of emissions at this same point, because again, I want to be super clear on what these things are. So scope 1, this can be classified as the fuel that you burn. This is going to be in your company facilities, you know, fuel, refrigerants kind of get captured in that as well as company vehicles. So your fleet, that's going to be that space there in scope 1. Scope 2 relates to electricity. Mostly there's a little bit of purchase cooling within that, but actually electricity is the main focus. And indeed, you guys have measured that as well. Now, as you would have seen from the last slide, really from the starting point, you guys have been measuring your business travel, which is scope 3, category 6 there, but you've been able to add so much more. And that's incredibly exciting because scope 3, I mean, there is so much within that. There's categories within scope 3. So if you're only measuring business travel, we know that there's going to be a big gap, right? So the fact that you guys have been able to get to this point is incredibly exciting. What we find as well is when organizations get to this point of measuring their full scope 3, they realize that upwards of 95, 98, 99% of an organization's footprint lives in scope 3. Right? Particularly that purchase goods and services space. That is anything that you are buying into your business, right? It can be from a goods perspective. It's going to be the wine, of course, that's a physical product that you guys are buying in, but it's also going to be things like your laptops, your equipment, the paper you use, right? It's quite holistic and quite broad. And actually that list, when we pull it, ooh, it can be long. It can be thousands of lines long, that Excel spreadsheet, right? So even just getting to grips with that category alone is really tricky. But it's incredibly important that we do this. You know, it also speaks, I think, to the ambition that net zero represents. It's not just about, you know, what's within our immediate control, the electricity, the lights we can turn on and off. It's about this broader supply chain picture, right? And it creates what I think is amazing, this interconnected web of responsibility, right? And we have to start measuring our, you know, all the goods and services that we are getting from our suppliers, it then requires us to have a conversation with them. When we think about how we might reduce our carbon footprint, it requires us to kind of look at that space particularly, right? Oh, sorry, I think somebody's off mute. Oh, no worries. There we go. We've put you on mute again. No worries. Welcome, welcome. So I would love to actually just reflect. So we've talked now about what it was the last time, not even 250. Now that we've measured all of these additional categories, what do we think Corney Barrow's carbon footprint is now that we have measured quite a bit more? Let's sense check, and I'm going to share the results with you on the next slide, but I'd love to just sort of see what our initial thoughts are, our impressions. Don't worry, this isn't like a pop quiz. You're not gonna get like marked wrong. It's anonymous, so it's all good. If you've just joined us, you can complete this question by either scanning the QR code on your phone or going to slido.com and entering that code. All right, we've got 22 people who responded. Let's see what we're saying. About 5,500. Yes, amazing. Most of you guys got this right. This is incredible. I like asking it in this way, right? Because the reality is that we might think, oh, you know, it's gonna be giant. It's gonna be 10,000 or more. The reality is that Corney and Barrow are not in that sort of business that is considered highly emitting. Most of the time, organizations that would have really high carbon footprints are in the manufacturing sector, right? They're like molding steel and creating big machinery and using lots and lots and lots of energy. That's an example of a sector that is usually their carbon footprints are really high. I've seen a carbon footprint as high as 150,000 tons of TCO2e, right? And that's the manufacturing sector. So you guys fit somewhere in the middle of that. And so 5,500 is pretty spot on. Right here, look at your organization's carbon footprint now that you have measured the full scope 3, right? So not quite 5,500, 5,446.1 TCO2e. And I appreciate that there's a lot of like lines and then words on this slide. So let's talk through what we're seeing. The colors, first and foremost, we can see we have about 3.2%, which is our scope 1. Scope 2 is down to 0, and that's because you guys are procuring renewable energy, right? As soon as you do that, that is going to go down to almost 0, right? Now, we have here as well our scope 1, and this essentially is because our scope 3. Gosh, what am I talking about? I'm talking about one thing and looking at another. Let me just focus in here. Scope 3 is in blue here, and this is, again, very familiar. As we said, it can be 95, 98% of our carbon footprint, and indeed, ours is 96 0.6% of our carbon footprint. When we look at all of the various sort of categories here, we can see that we have purchased goods and services really coming out on top, especially in that scope 3 space. Purchased goods and services is 78% of our carbon footprint as it stands. So definitely a lot of work to do, but a very familiar challenge when organizations get to this point. That is a very typical balance, right? But we also have things, the reality is, it's all well and good to pay attention to our purchased goods and services, but there are still a lot of other categories where we're having impact. Things like, our business travel, our employee commuting. I will say as well, I did want to touch on what Sedona mentioned at the beginning. The fact that so many of you guys completed the employee commuting survey means that this is a really accurate figure. So thank you all so much for doing that. That is incredible. I truly think that's some of the best response rates I've ever seen. And I'm just so impressed. Thank you for rallying behind that, because that means this is really accurate. It also helps enable us to sort of see ourselves in this space. Again, we all contribute in some way, shape, or form. And that is one of those ways that feels a little bit more direct, right? But let me show you this information in a slightly more granular detail. Now, the whole report itself will be sent around and circulated. It is great to go into further detail, especially if you're, a data detail-oriented person. But I wanted to show you specifically more information behind the purchased goods and services, right? So one more slide, click here. Here we go. We can see what these purchased goods and services are by essentially description. Now, no surprise, knowing the nature of the business that you guys do, most of our impact purchased goods and services is in the wine space. And that's because, wine, number one, you're obviously purchasing large quantities of wine, but equally, wine is a product that is physically produced, right? It requires energy, it requires transportation, and we're going to be having, large impacts from it for that reason. The other thing I remember Rebecca brought up in our in-person session is that, wine also comes in glass bottles. Those are things that are quite heavy to transport. And so there's a lot of creativity around that space that I know their team is exploring to help mitigate the emissions, right? So it's really impressive to see that happening already. But we also have things like services, right? Computer programming, consulting services. This might even be something like Microsoft Teams, right? That is a service that our organization has to pay for. We also have things like insurance and, printing and recording services, financial services. So all of these things are contributing to this main category here, right? So this again will enable us to be increasingly more targeted as we look at making emissions reduction in future. Now, the other thing I like to talk about, as well as talking about, the goods and services that you're purchasing, especially when we talk about the wine, I think it's really important that we talk about how these things are transported. So this is an example here. We can see a bit more information about how all of these products are getting to Corney Barrow. So we can see here this balance between like HGVs and cargo ship and van and diesel. There's quite a few different modes of transport, and we know that that's because it's coming to you guys from all over the world, right? The next slide I have actually talks about where your top suppliers are, right? So we know quite a few of them are coming from France, but we also have that breakdown for Italy, Chile, Argentina, Romania, New Zealand, the UK, Spain, Australia, and then everything else has just been kind of plonked into other there. But again, will enable us to be quite targeted. This is really interesting as well, I find, because we know that net zero is not just a national movement, it's an international movement, and we will have to be working across borders to find solutions. So France is a really interesting one. I mean, they've been quite ambitious with emissions. They, I think, are the first country to have made it illegal to take flights that are within 2 hours. You have to take a train, right, to help mitigate emissions. So this is going to be really interesting to see how these conversations overlap across borders, right? Then, okay, just a few more slides, and I promise I will pause and breathe, and you guys can ask some questions if you have them about your footprint. But ultimately, we wanted to share with you the detail behind this year's business travel as well. Again, something that maybe some of us in the room contribute to. We know that there are some flights that are required. Obviously, looking at, where your wine is coming from, I appreciate that we're going to be sort of traveling to potentially meet suppliers and things. We have long-haul business class, sort of a short-haul flight. We have domestic flights, as well as long-haul averages. This essentially relates to what level of detail can we prove when we're trying to measure this. So the difference there between long haul business class and long haul average probably just has to do with the data that we had available, right? But it's helpful for us to understand this balance. Cars is another really interesting one, right? What kind of cars are we using that are diesel versus petrol? Looking forward, is there any way we could be transitioning to electric vehicles or things like that? So helpful, again, for us to just kind of pay attention. Now, we do have to be quite sensitive and careful with some of these categories. I appreciate, that business travel is something that's probably really core to your business. And us, if we were to just come in and say, right, no more business travel, you would just roll your eyes, right? And you just carry on. So we just need to be a little bit more sensitive to how we can be critical of our business travel, but do it in a way that's really smart, right? Really efficient. We're planning ahead to make sure that we have the most, sustainable routes. We're getting to places in an efficient way. And yeah, there's going to be things we want to explore in this space without removing it entirely, right? So then we also have things like employee commuting. Again, really happy to see here the sort of balance. We have quite a few people who are taking, national rail and buses using public transportation, which is great. There is definitely still some people who are traveling by car, which is natural. I think knowing the nature of your operation, public transport isn't always available. But again, we want to be sort of a little bit self-critical and reflect on how we can make improvements. Again, this is an area that each of us individually is contributing to, so it's helpful to pay attention to ways we might be able to shift this. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to walk to work every single day instead of taking the car. That's just not viable, right? However, it might mean that where we normally take a car, maybe one day a week, we shift to public transport, right? And we do this incrementally. We try and improve in an incremental way, right? All right, let me just sort of breathe for half a second. This is an opportunity for you guys to come off mute or use the chat if you guys have any questions at this time. I appreciate we have some rooms of people, Karen's room and Pippa's room. If you want to come off mute and ask questions, you're very welcome to.
Last quick question around electric vehicles.
Yes.
Is an electric vehicle assumption as a zero carbon entry in this? Because I'm conscious that we do have quite a few electric vehicles across the fleet, but I note they're not showing in any of this information. So is the conclusion therefore that an electric vehicle is classified as a zero carbon emission?
So that is a great question. Let me actually go. I have it in here. I didn't actually show you fleet travel, but here we go. Here's a look at that breakdown. So great question around fleet. It's not that it's not included, the electric vehicles, it's just that I didn't show it to you. So it's definitely in that more in detail to the report. So we have captured this. What I will say about electric vehicles, it's not a sort of zero impact kind of category. The reality is that the electric vehicles that we're using are likely still charged from the grid, which is a bit of a mix using renewable energy, but as well as fossil fuels. So there's still going to be an impact there. However, the way we calculate that, the emissions factor that we use, we essentially will take how many miles are you traveling, by this emissions factor. And the emissions factor for things like diesel vehicles is very high. The reality is that that is a very high emitting activity. With electric vehicles, it's greatly reduced. It's not zero, but it's much less. So what we're seeing here is just essentially that sort of carbon impact. But what would be really interesting, I think, is if we looked at that consumption, because the reality is that we might not be doing much fleet travel using diesel vehicles. We might actually be doing a similar amount of travel with electric vehicles. But because the impact is so much lower for electric vehicles, we see that category shrink, right? So it's really good to reflect on that. Electrification in general is going to be a net zero solution that everybody wants to be considering, whether that's electrifying our vehicles, and things like that. But even things like I talk with the horticultural business about electrifying their tools, like anything that can be electrified is great, because the reality is that as we invest in renewable energy, those things will be powered renewably. So that's a really good sort of thing to reflect on. Did I answer your question there? Does this help you give that perspective?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, it's what I thought it would be. And I know we're looking at biofuel, aren't we, as a way of potentially bringing down that fleet diesel number, which is pretty high. So yeah, no, thank you.
Of course, that's amazing. Oh, so Donna, go ahead. You want to respond?
I was only going to just to clarify, so the fleet data there is in relation to the company cars and the diesel used out of East Kilbride. So obviously I know Mark is looking at biofuel out of Hoddesdon, but the calculations for Hoddesdon and Great Bear are in our scope 3. So this is where we just need it just possibly gets slightly confusing because that's indirect, because we contract with Great Bear for the Hoddesdon warehouse. So this data here, and Hannah makes a very good point. If we looked at the mileage of the electric vehicles, of the PHEVs, etc., in comparison to diesel. It'll be interesting to see how many more miles those vehicles do, and then you can kind of get a better sense for your bang for your buck, as it were.
Yeah, I love that. And it's so interesting to hear that you guys, maybe even if it's not captured in this category, but that you're exploring biomass and biofuels, because the reality is that, I really appreciate that with heavy goods vehicles, diesel vehicles, like the reality is that there's just not great technology. There's not like an electric alternative that we can immediately switch to. So looking at the specific fuel that you're using is another really great alternative. So really interesting to hear you guys are exploring solutions already. Yeah. Any other questions? Again, I've got slides that are sort of hidden in the background here. So maybe you have a question about something that I didn't necessarily show, but that I can flick to as well. Got 2 pages worth of people, so I'm going to flick through, make sure I can see everybody. All right, no questions at this time. That's absolutely fine. I promise that, we're always here to answer questions. Sedona knows this information inside and out. So again, where we have questions, we can always pick up at a later stage. But I think let's transition on. We can carry on with our sort of session in that regard. It's lovely to ensure we have enough time for our brainstorming as a group. But before we do that, the only last thing we want to do is really take some time to congratulate you properly. Sedona mentioned a whole bunch of wonderful names for people who have contributed to this work in the past, but we want to make sure that we all put our hands together and officially congratulate you again on achieving Planet Mark certification. You guys are 3 years in, and this is a look at your certificate to date. It is wonderful to see that you guys are making emissions reduction already. We measure specifically the reduction that you're making across scope 1 and scope 2, which is like about 16%. And what that looks like per employee is actually about 20% reduction per employee. So this is incredible, really well done. We're so pleased to sort of be working with you and to see this progress, right? So well done. Let's move on now. We've got plenty of time for our brainstorming session. This is so exciting. I always love this part because especially we've had a session in the past, we've already had that opportunity to sort of start pulling out some initial ideas. The reality is that every single one of us are kind of coming at this from different perspectives. As I mentioned, we have our own little sort of nooks and crannies, our unique perspectives within the business. And the reality is that we need to lean on this in order to be successful, right? We know that sustainability is really helpful when we, encourage innovation and we collaborate across our teams. And I love this quote here from Paul Pullman. He says, the key to creating a vibrant and sustainable company is to find ways to get all employees, from top executives to assembly line workers, personally engaged in day-to-day corporate sustainability efforts, right? The reality is that this isn't just about one person doing all the work. We are all involved on a daily basis. So the last time we were together, I actually pulled out some of the ideas that you guys submitted from the last session. Incredible amount of ideas, recycling bins, looking at hybrid fleet, but we know that possibly some of this stuff has already gained momentum. Maybe we've implemented a few things, or we've explored them. We realize actually maybe that isn't the right solution for us at this time. So what we want to do, instead of asking the same question again, just submitting ideas, we want to evolve this conversation, right? So the way I want to do this for our discussion today is using this prompt called Stop, Start, Continue, and Improve, right? So the questions we want you reflecting on in this session: what should we stop doing? Right? And what should we start doing? We can, what I would say is sometimes when it's the first time we've had this conversation, people don't necessarily know what to be looking for. Appreciating the fact that we have already been together in May 2023, there's been some time. Maybe you have now heard about other organizations that are doing something and you want to add your idea. Please do. I love that. We also want to reflect, however, on maybe some of the shifts that have happened recently and what is going well, right? What is working? What should we continue to do to mitigate our carbon emissions? And also what needs refining, right? We appreciate that sometimes these things get implemented and we learn, right? They don't necessarily work entirely, but actually the concept is good. So we just need to sort of tweak it. So what could be improved? The other question I have, and I always like to challenge our members with, is how can we challenge business as usual? Right? We know that business, the way we've done things in the past, is what has gotten us into this mess in the first place. So we need to be a bit brave in this space, a bit ambitious, and try our best to challenge business as usual, right? So what I'm going to do, I appreciate that some of us are in groups already, but then others are kind of in individual sort of spaces here. I'm going to throw the Slido up. You won't see your answers like pop up until I do another click. What I want to do is actually give people 5 minutes now to just think for themselves and add some ideas to Slido. Then what we're going to do is I'm going to click and we're going to look through the ideas and we're going to discuss them as a group, right? Unfortunately, my breakout rooms where I could kind of shift you all into little groups isn't working this morning, which is something happening with Teams. I can tell there's something going on in the background, but we're going to make do. So take 5 minutes now to share some of your thoughts and add them to Slido, and then we'll come back and discuss them as a group off mute. Two more minutes. I've added the questions that I wanted us to reflect on in the chat if you need a reminder. All right. Our 5 minutes is up. It goes quick, doesn't it? Especially for those of us that are in groups trying to talk amongst like 7 people. So thank you for working with us, being flexible to the rest of the group. Oh, amazing. I see 10 of you have submitted some Slido ideas. Now, no pressure, but the in-person group last week came up with 7 pages worth of ideas. I was so impressed, right? And it's incredibly important for them to do this and for you guys to contribute as well. The first thing I did when I saw all of those ideas come through is I sent it on to our strategy team, the individuals who are going to be supporting you to create your net zero action plan, and immediately was saying, we got to use this, we got to incorporate this into their strategy, right? So I'm hoping we can do the same with some of your ideas. Let's take a look and reflect on some of what you guys have submitted, right? Oh, this is so good. Look how many ideas there are. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Guys have done very well. Thank you so much. Let's read through some of this, right? Digitizing board packs and tasting notes. Absolutely. Digitizing is one of those incredible sort of solutions. Again, when we talk about electrification, absolutely, there's a role for that within sort of paper procurement as well. So it is something that I think would be worth exploring, especially appreciating that some of these probably packs can be quite large. Nice idea. More creative working. Do some offices need to open 5 days a week? That is definitely a good reflection. I remember that this has come up in the past, and I know there are some nuances here to the way that Corney and Barrow prefer to work, but I like that it's being brought up. Again, it relates to us being a little bit critical of business as usual, and so I really appreciate you guys raising that point. Secondary glazing, right, at TMS. I think that's a really brilliant idea. Generally speaking, building sort of improvements. I know the London site office, for example, is definitely undergoing like a whole office renovation, and where we can look at better insulation in general, that is going to be a lovely idea. So let me just scroll through these here so we can take a look at them. Avoid domestic flights. Yeah, absolutely. For those of us in the UK, the reality is that train, I appreciate, takes more time and in some cases can be a little bit more money, but the reality is that we need to be a little bit critical of the way that we're traveling and embed sort of alternatives within our company culture, right? So where we might be taking the train, it might take a little bit longer. We need to build that into our work streams, the way that we are expected to contribute when we're on a train, as an example. Lovely ideas. Let me just say, I actually would really like to get some people coming off of mute and sharing their ideas as well. This isn't just about me rattling through. Would anybody like to come off mute and share one of the ideas that they submitted? Ooh, what brave soul is going to come off mute? Sajana, you're going to save me from this one?
I was only going to clap just to say, on behalf of the buying team, I know merchant buying in particular have been doing a lot of work in regards to getting data on AX of our actual bottle weights. And Rebecca has been working quite closely with Pasqua, I believe it is. A lot of you guys came back from your trips recently and said that they are looking at reduced glass weights, which is going to be a massive help because they are really a big producer for us.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I remember that from our session last week. Rebecca raised her hand and was saying there's already some incredible work that's going on behind the scenes. So I think that that's going to be something that we can see contribute quite significantly, where we can reduce those weights is amazing. There've been some other points to sort of to that regard around shipping high volumes of wine in bulk. And actually, it was fascinating. I was talking to Percy again last week, and he was saying, we actually used to do that like way, way back in the day. That's how the industry ran. So it's interesting to see how that has flip-flopped a little bit. And my understanding is the volumes are almost like not high enough. He was explaining to me, with my limited knowledge of the wine industry, that would be more suitable for the likes of Tesco and Sainsbury's, who are buying volumes in that sort of space. But it's interesting to at least raise. And again, maybe it's not about all of your wines being in bulk. Maybe we could actually find 2 or 3 wines that we could be ordering in bulk, and again, I appreciate being a bit sort of critical in that space and just again raising the question. Anybody else want to share some thoughts? Again, no wrong answers. It's just nice to be able to reflect together as a group on some of the things that we think we could improve or continue. Ooh, bike to work scheme. That's a nice one. Anybody else? We're feeling quiet this morning. I appreciate it's an early morning session. That's absolutely fine. These ideas are wonderful. Thank you all so much for contributing. I really do think that there's some brilliant nuggets in here. Oh, I like this one. Link ordering to a carbon cost message. Amazing. Absolutely. When we think about how we could be communicating this information to our customers, how we could be engaging them, I love that idea. The other element, I suppose, is this internal space, linking ordering to a carbon cost message. That might be an internal suggestion, so please feel free to refine. But I agree that the reality is that where we're trying to embed, carbon into our decision-making processes internally, that's a really good example of something we could potentially explore, right? Yeah, keep recycling in the offices. Absolutely. This is the kind of thing when we talk about what we can continue to do, it really is important that we, again, maintain a little bit of a drumbeat with some of the things that are going well and the things we need to sustain, right? So I appreciate we've probably talked about recycling in the past, but it's really good to bring up the fact that that's working and we need to continue with that, right? Alternative packaging, bag and box and Tetra Pak. So Tetra Pak is a really interesting one, and I definitely think would be worth exploring. I mean, I'm American, so I love a bit of wine in a box, but that might just be me. I appreciate that might be something that almost goes in line with the, finding alternatives to glass or buying wines in bulk. So I think there might be some synergies between some of these ideas, actually. That's really good. This one, reusing cardboard for delivery boxes. Yes, collecting those from customers. Absolutely. Better marketing and communication with customers to take advantage of grouping orders. Absolutely. A lot of the times this is just about customer management and expectation management. So where we know we have solutions, we just have to, get a bit more well-versed in how we can bring these ideas to our customers. Yes, Karen's room. I know Karen has left, but please come off mute. Go ahead.
Hi, it's Colette. I just wanted to highlight something. Like, all of these ideas are great, but we already gave a lot of them last year. So what's the process and how we follow up this idea? Because, we're saying the same thing over and over again, but not seeing the impact of it. That would be great to have next year. I won't be there, but like a follow up on all of that, because it's kind of disheartening to see all of this and then saying the same thing and then nothing is happening in the office. Also, one thing is lots of things are happening, but we like working on so many different things. I'm not taking that personally, but I saw like reducing the number of brochures. We've been doing that. We're working on that, but lots of people don't know. So how do we communicate internally? I know that we've got this great newsletter, but how do we do better? Sorry, it was like lots of things.
Lots of questions. I'm so pleased. Thank you so much. They're such good reflections and they're really important. So the other thing to keep in mind is to the point about the brochures in here, that might have been an example of something that's going well, right? Something we could continue. So don't necessarily worry that isn't landing, because I do see we definitely have heard about the work that you guys are doing. But internal communication is a good point, and maybe it was raised as something we think we need to do, and actually we've already put a lot of effort into that space. So the newsletter is a good one. That might be one we need to just take away and just reflect on. It's part of this exercise is kind of feeling out what is landing, how are we internalizing this information, and that might be an area that we could improve in general, right? To your point about some of the ideas that are reoccurring and are coming up, I appreciate that this is not a perfect process. One of the things I will say that will be a real step change from the years we have been working in the past is this net zero strategy and this transition plan that we are going to create with you in the new year. So this is something that is going to detail all of these solutions. It's going to have deadlines, and it's going to have, the role for you guys internally is going to be to assign responsibility to this, right? So the reality is that sometimes I appreciate where we don't have sustainability managers and people who are looking after this full time, it can get a little lost between sessions and workshops. There's always a bit of a drumbeat, but it can be really hard for this to be managed in a way that everything gets done between each of these opportunities that we get to sit down. But I think it's a really good point. We definitely don't want to be sort of just sharing the same ideas and not kind of feeling successful. So hopefully the net zero transition plan is going to give us a way to kind of bring it all together, identify really critical deadlines, and pay attention to our successes along the way. Yeah, go ahead. I see there's another comment there.
Yeah, sorry, it's James this time, not Karen. Karen only on Saturday night. But there's a few things that have come up here that I think it's probably worth commenting on. So cardboard boxes, Mark and the warehouse team have looked at. There is an integrity issue around ensuring that obviously we're carrying glass, so we need to ensure the integrity of boxes is correct.
Yep.
There's a lot of work on the TMS project around, someone mentioned about the glazing and the infrastructure there. Mark and the warehouse team over the last 12 months, or about 12 months ago, we now have data for every single bottle that goes on every single van. That then led to a change of postcode day changes, which the team would be aware of, which I think I'm right in saying reduced delivery costs by about 20%, but didn't impact customer service. Bike to work scheme, I know it's been looked at, and I think, again, if I'm not incorrect, Sedona, that is part of the sort of, particularly here at TMS, is part of that restructure of not just doing the scheme, but also having the right facilities in terms of storage, security, and shower equipment. So I think there's quite a lot of stuff on here that is being done, but is at working stages. Just a snapshot
that's fabulous. And that's just it. This is like, what are we doing? What's working? What do we know? Maybe needs refinement, but I think generally speaking, it's great to touch on what we are actually pursuing, right? So Donna, did you want to share? I see your hand up. Go ahead. Oh, you're on mute. Hold on. You're on mute. Oh, hold on.
There we are. All right, can you hear me?
There you go.
Lovely. No, I was only going to say, I mean, the newsletter is probably the main vehicle we've got at the moment in terms of getting our updates out. And if I'm brutally honest, I don't know how many staff in the business read it. However, if there is things that are of significant, I mean, this month we've pretty much done a draft, because I'm going to send out we're going to send out the recording of this to everybody, and the 2 lots of analysis that Planet Mark have done for us, so you can all have a look at those, at your leisure without trying to see it on a television screen. If there's any significant things, I've also got Andrew to do an update, Andrew Clark, on this newsletter as well, about some of the stuff that's included in the redevelopment for TMS. So I think we've sort of been in a bit of a changing process where we've had to collect the data and understand the position and where we are, and we've still got all these ideas, and I've still got all of last year's ideas as well, and there is probably some more stuff going on in the background that isn't getting very well communicated, so I accept that point. So I think between us, if there's things that need to be said or little snippets, again, come to me with regards to the newsletter, so we can get something put on the newsletter in the first instance. And maybe with the marketing team, we need to look at other bite-sized bits of communication. But I have asked for feedback on the newsletter, and I haven't had an awful lot of feedback on the newsletter. So if anybody has got any feedback, I would appreciate it.
Amazing. Thank you, Sedona, for your response. It's really helpful to have your internal insight as well. I appreciate that I'm here a bit external, so knowing the nuances of what's happening on the ground is really helpful. So I'm just conscious of time. Thank you all so much for staying on with us for a few extra minutes. I'm going to move us along. The only thing left is literally just next steps, but I'm really going to breeze by this because you guys, I'll send over the slides and you can take a look at this at your leisure. It just relates to what, is available to you throughout the rest of your Planet Mark membership, various webinars, our website, which has loads of good tools and toolkits, ways to connect with us on social, and just reach us in general. So I'll leave you guys with a quote from the one and only Margaret Mead. She says here, she's a cultural anthropologist. She says, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." So I appreciate sometimes we might feel like 1 or 2 people beating a drum, but that is really, truly where the power is. So thank you so much for taking time out of your day to reflect on our roles, how we can contribute, and how we can get better. Yeah? Stunning. That's everything. I'll stop sharing just so I can see all of you on one screen.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a lovely rest of your day. Bye for now.